In our last video, we covered the meta raw IG builds in Monster Hunter World, and before 80KT, those would have been the only builds we would need to cover. While in theory IG should always have been better at Elemental, it is one of the fastest hitting weapons in the game after all, the balance on the numbers on the weapons never made this the case. There were some cases where Elemental IGs had a little bit more damage on certain attacks, but they always fell behind on tornado slashes, due to that being a very high motion value attack. Overall, this ended up balancing out the damage of putting Elemental behind. Raw just had better damage numerically. But now thanks to 80KT, we have our juicy new Kjarr weapons, which now have enough damage to make up that difference. Between the high natural stats and the built-in crit elements, even if they fall slightly behind on tornado slashes, they make up for it with the rest of the kit. Yes, we finally have Elemental IGs that can deal max deeps! But how do you maximize the damage on your Elemental insect glaives? Well, I'm JinJinx.
And I'm Tuna. And we're
the Monster Hunter Math Guys. And this is Monster Hunter Meta Elemental Insect Glaive builds.
Today we'll be talking about why Elemental is better than Raw with Aerial IG, but still ultimately worse than Ground. We'll also be covering the Elemental Insect Glaives that outdamage their Raw counterparts from the previous video. Keep in mind that Elemental Insect Glaive is a matchup dependent weapon. We also won't be able to provide any craftable versions because they don't exist. Only Kjarr weapons win with Elemental IG.
There is one very niche case where the gay bulge does win, but more on that later. Now I do want to start off with a quick disclaimer. All the builds, analysis, breakdowns, and everything we do on the channel are not meant to tell you how to play. Unless you are a speedrunner or you do care about max deeps, these are not the only way to play and we are not suggesting that. The purpose of what we do is to educate and inform. It's to give you the factual information on the relative strengths of different builds and playstyles so that you can make informed decisions. Play how you like and enjoy yourself. It is a video game after all.
All of the sets in this video will feature our standard attack buffs along with the level 3 Kinsect buff to showcase what the EFR and damage will look like at the highest possible end for normal play. Kinsect buffs are a percentage raw attack modifier, so a raw build that's stronger when buffed is still stronger without the Kinsect buffs. However, elemental damage is unaffected by this buff. That's important to keep in mind because Elemental IG still only deals around 20% of its damage as Elemental.
So first off, yes, Elemental IG is better at Aerial IG than Raw builds. IG aerial attacks have significantly higher hits per second and much lower motion value. Naturally, with elemental damage being flat damage, this makes it much stronger on them. I don't want to go too deep into an explanation on why faster hitting weapons deal more elemental damage because, well, we have a video explaining the exact topic of how elemental damage works. Link to that in the top right.
The real issue is that even with Elemental Aerial IG being better, it's still much weaker than Ground. Assuming the hit zone values are the same, the total DPS of Elemental Aerial combos versus Ground combos is still lower. You can easily test this on the training pool. Ground combos simply have higher numbers. But the hit zone values aren't the same. Ground IG can always target exclusively weak points when used skillfully. The simple geometry of most monsters doesn't let you hit exclusively weak points when you're using aerials. The backs and wings of most monsters have terrible hit zone values for either Sever or Elements, often both.
On top of that, because you won't be hitting weak points, you can't take advantage of weakness exploits. This means you lose 50% affinity, which is a very big deal because Elemental IGs run both crit boost and crit elements. And you can't use max might because aerials use up stamina. And the current meta in Monster Hunter World is White Sharpness Master's Touch sets. This means you lose sharpness very quickly between the high hits per second and not being at 100% affinity. And the moment you hit blue sharpness, you lose 10% of your raw damage and 6% of your elemental damage, which is even less damage. This forces you to run protective polish builds most of the time. But the extra 1 minute added to your polish sharpness with protective polish is not enough time for an aerial IG to kill something. The damage numbers simply aren't there.
In summary, when both are hitting the training pole, Ground IG simply has higher damage. In your average hunt, Ground gets to hit better weak points, which maintains higher affinity, which keeps white sharpness higher, and you don't need to rely on protective polish, which allows you to build more damage creep.
This all being said, there are two matchups that Aerial IG is particularly strong against. Lunastra and Arc-Tempered Xeno, due to the fact that Aerial IG can always hit juicy weak points on them. However, even in these cases, Ground IG is still stronger if you're going for max deeps and overall faster clear times. The numbers simply are not well balanced in Aerial IG's favor. However, Aerial IG is better for safe clears of these monsters. Most of their attacks are fairly ground-based, so simply being in the air makes the run safer, albeit longer.
At the end of the day, Aerial Insect Glaive is fun, so run it if you enjoy it. This is a video game, and games are meant to be enjoyed. I like Vice and Dragon Soul, and that sure as hell isn't optimal.
Filthy casual. And I enjoy Wyvern ammo only meme cannon runs, and that sure as hell isn't optimal. Filthier casual.
If you're going to run Aerial Insect Glaive, elemental matching deals more damage, so keep that in mind. But ground IG will always kill things significantly faster. Fingers crossed for Iceborne.
Alright, let's get into the builds. First up, we have the Kjarr Water Glaive. At 595.06 EFR, this build has very respectable raw damage. On top of that, it gets an effective element of 49.22, assuming average HR quest mods of 1.2 on a water hit zone value of 30 like Teostra, that's 17 to 18 extra water damage per hit depending on rounding. Very nice. Suffice to say, assuming that a monster has a high water hit zone value and not a high dragon hit zone value, for example Teostra, this is your highest DPS option. If the monster also has a high dragon hit zone value like Behemoth for example, go with the Joe IG build from the previous video. And if a monster is particularly susceptible to paralysis, go with the Para IG build. The 10 units of white does mean you have to play fairly cleanly with your stamina management and weak point sniping. It does mean that it only takes 20 weak point whiffs on average to hit blue sharpness. However, if you are not comfortable with playing with only 10 units of white sharpness, you can change the water deco into an attack deco. Then switch the charm to a handicraft charm. This does gain you some handicraft while costing you some EFR, but we would recommend this against something like Uragan if you aren't comfortable sniping his weak points.
Next up is the Kjarr King Glaive. This insect glaive is almost identical to the water IG we just showed, essentially having 10 less true raw and 10 more affinity, but needs 1 more handicraft to hit white. So we change out the max might deco for a handy deco and the water deco for fire decos, and wham bam thank you ma'am, you have your go-to for Valhazak and Kirin. And same as the water IG, if you need more sharpness, just change the handy deco for an attack deco and grab a handicraft charm. It's not really as needed since Kirin and Val both have easy to hit weak points, but it's an option if you aren't comfortable in your stamina management or weak point aim.
Next up is a bit of a weird one, the Kjarr Ice IG. The natural white allows us to make this a peak performance build, hence the mandatory health augment. The last level of ice attack only gains us 10 ice attack, so it's not really worth it. At 578.42 EFR, with peak active and 42.19 effective element, this IG will hit the hardest against ice weak monsters. However, there is a caveat. Out of all of the notable ice weak monsters, all but Lunastra are weak to paralysis. This build will only deal slightly higher damage than the Paraglaive build from the previous video, making the Paraglaive almost always better to run. For example, when using the triple rising slash into double sweep infinite combo against Diablos' belly, this ice build will deal 517 damage fully buffed. Give or take a few for rounding. Now assuming the 1.2 times HR quest modifier, the Paraglaive will be dealing 473 with this infinite combo. That is a 9.3% damage increase. We chose to pick this infinite combo because it is the most in favor of elemental builds. It has high hits per second with a relatively low total motion value. When comparing tornado slashes, this build deals 5 more damage, a 1.14% increase. Again, give or take a few damage points, Monster Hunter World uses floats for damage rounding, so we can't be 100% accurate with our damage rounding. At least on paper, especially when it comes to elemental calculations.
However, the Paraglaive can easily get anywhere from 2 to 4 paras on Diablos, depending on how fast you kill it. Much of Bloss' kit is a time waster, like his burrow attacks or his charge attacks, so paras are invaluable for speeding up kill times. Same thing as Odogaron. So if you want to make sure you're dealing max damage per hit, this build will be better than the para, but realistically, Para IG will give you faster kill times against ice weak monsters simply because they're weak to para.
Except Lunastra, but Lunastra is even weirder and has her own special build. Credit to Hottadogu over on our Discord server for putting together this build. He is an IG main and speedrunner with several TA records under his belt, and also a delicious food. As always, link to his channel will be in the description. So with peak active but not latent power active, this build hits 530.24 EFR and 40.08 effective elements. Lunastra is unique in that Weakness Exploit isn't a very useful skill against her when you are using Sever type weapons. Her only Sever weak points are the tail and wings, neither of which the ground IG can hit very consistently. Yes, aerial IG can hit the wings all the time, but even then ground IG still kills faster.
Latent power triggers fairly quickly simply due to the chip damage you take while fighting Luna. When it does, your EFR jumps up to 571.03 and your EFE to 42.19. Of course, this is with Peak active. Unfortunately, if you play inside her puddles and don't control Luna's aura, Peak won't be up that much even with a health augment. But simply put, there really isn't much else we can add as damage skills. You can replace Peak with attack boost if you want, but it is possible to play around Luna's damage if you're skillful enough.
Because this set does not have wind resistance, you will need to keep up triple buffs because they give you super armor that allows you to ignore Luna's wind pressure while you're attacking.
If you want to aerial Luna's wings instead, use this aerial Kjarr Decay set instead. Everything is stacked on this set. Elemental airborne, airborne, and crit element. On Lunastra and AT Xeno, this is your hardest hitting aerial set you can pack. 95% affinity before Agitator, and over 100 when you have it. Again, ground IG sets will outdamage this, even in the two best matchups for aerial IG. But aerial is a lot safer, so if you want comfier hunts, use this against Lunastra and AT Xeno.
Finally, we have another build from Hotadogu. This is a Kjarr Decay build specifically for use against Rathalos and Azure Rathalos. This is an interesting specialty build. The optimal way to kill Wraths is to trip them, hit their face, trip them again, rinse, repeat until dead, with the occasional calculated dunk in between. The issue with using the Joe IG against Wraths is that the Joe IG has terrible affinity when hitting the legs because they are not weak points. This means less damage and losing sharpness, potentially enough to lose white sharpness if your crit RNG is bad enough.
This build has 75% affinity when hitting the legs, which is much better than Joe IG's 50%, leading to faster and more consistent trip chaining. And with 3 times the white sharpness, it's hard to hit blue during a hunt. Also thank you to Akka and Godhigh over in our Discord server who collaborated with Hotdog on designing this set.
Okay, so it's officially later, so let's talk about the one craftable elemental option that really does perform well. And that is using the Gay Bulge instead of using Kjarr Decay here if you do not have Kjarr Decay. So this set here does hit higher affinity against the legs when Agitator is active. But due to the lower elemental damage, it ends up kind of equalizing and the Kjarr Decay ends up about the same when it comes to tripping legs. And the Kjarr Decay does deal more damage when hitting the head, making it overall slightly better. Really, the biggest issue with the true Gay Bulge here is that it only has 10 hits of white sharpness. With 94% affinity with Agitator active and Max Smite active, it doesn't really do a very good job of maintaining its own sharpness. However, if you use an affinity augment here instead of a health augment, you will have an easier time maintaining that. At that point, you only really risk losing sharpness if you have bad Max Smite stamina management. Overall, slightly less damage, but a good option if you don't have the Kjarr Decay. There is also one other situation the true Gay Bulge is fairly useful, which is using aerial IG against Xeno'jiiva or Lunastra. Due to the fact that this actually can hit 100% affinity without max might, you do have an easy time maintaining your white sharpness, but the Kjarr Decay still does more damage, and ground IG still does more damage. But it is an option if you enjoy using aerial IG and don't have the Kjarr Decay available yet. Alright, that about does it, guys.
As always, thank you for watching. If you liked the video, you know what to do. Let us know in the comments what your opinion on aerial IG is. If you're looking for somebody to play games with, we have a pretty active community over on our Discord server, the Mathalos Nest. I'd love it if you came and said hi in general. You can follow us on Twitter for updates on the channel, and you can also check me out on Twitch, where I stream almost every day. Huge thank you to Honey at honeyhuntersworld.com for providing the tools we use to make sets, and a huge thank you to our patrons, Ben, Haika, Checklim, Yoshi Cho, John Cowan, Ken, Robin, Bram Orsel, Lightweight, Skylar Yang, Lupin, Mongus, Lord Sidene, Jamie, and everyone else on Patreon who's been supporting the channel. We're going to be putting up another Patreon poll for the next meta guide. If you're interested in that, check it out. And you know what to do if you want to be notified for that video when it goes live. Thanks for sticking around till the end. Until next time, happy hunting, hunters. Bye!